We have been talking about the brutal attack that occurred on October 7th, 2023. That attack killed some, the numbers vary, but it's roughly around 1,400 individuals on the day of the attack and in the ensuing several days. And we still know that there are hostages that are being held captive by the terrorists that initiated these brutal attacks on the Israeli people almost a year ago. And yet still the fighting continues because the terrorists continue to hold the hostages and to hold certain territories that they ought not have. To speak to this in a very, very personal way, we are pleased. Well, one, I want to thank Aaron Gulbranson with the Tennessee Faith and Freedom Coalition. He's in studio with us, and he facilitated this wonderful conversation that we're about to have. Aaron, welcome in.
And thank you for shining a light on this stuff, Matt. You're a big supporter of Israel, and we appreciate your friendship as always on a variety of issues.
Well, how did you, before I introduce our guest, how did you find out that she was coming into town? Did you guys at the Tennessee Faith and Freedom Coalition, I imagine that you helped facilitate some of this happening?
Yeah, well, it's very nice when Mac Parnell in Georgia, who's does a lot of work like this over there, and then Tim Head, the national executive director, called me and be like, "Hey, would you guys like to host this? Maybe you can find some ways to highlight your story." And so that's kind of what happens. I mean, as you see, we did an Israel event with the Patricia Heaton's October 7th coalition a few weeks ago. And so anytime there's an opportunity to do this, to highlight the plight of the hostages, the survivors, we absolutely do so. Not only, in my opinion, is it our duty as Christians to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters, also, frankly, from a pragmatic standpoint, if you don't come at it from a biblical perspective, it's a humanitarian thing. And it's also our strongest ally in the Middle East.
Well, that's right, and that's the order that I would put it in. It's a biblical thing, it's a humanitarian thing, and then if those two things don't matter to you from a geopolitical standpoint, you better embrace the state of Israel, because otherwise the entire region is going to blow up on us. With all of that in mind, we are proud to welcome our guest. I'm going to try this, and I told you that I got it right when we talked the first time, and I'm going to try it. It's Oshrite Sabag?
Yeah, that's
Am I
right.
right?
You're right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
As a way of introduction, tell all of our listening audience where you're from, how long your family's been there. Just give us a sense of who you are and where you were on October 7th, 2023.
Well, I live in Kibbutz Nachal Oz. I'm a mother of 2 children, and I have a husband. We were all together in our house on October 7th. I live in Nachal Oz, which is located about half a mile from the border with Gaza. I lived there for the last 23 years of my life, and we were in our apartment on October 7th. But my family, I'm a Middle Eastern Jew. My family comes from the region. My father's side, many generations in the region of Israel, and I'm second generation of refugees. My mom is a refugee from Libya that was terrorized into Israel. So that's my story in a few seconds.
Give us, is all of your family, your immediate family, are you safe?
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Yes, we are.
Give us, we've heard the stories, we've seen many of the videos, horrific though they may be. Just give us your story. When you became aware of something going on, you say you lived some half a mile away from the border with Gaza?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nachal Oz is located very close to the border with Gaza, to the neighborhood of Sajaiya.
Is it relatively, I don't mean to interrupt you, but up until October 7th, how long had you been there, and did you feel relatively safe considering your proximity?
Okay, so this is very interesting because it has deteriorated over the years. I arrived there in my 20s. They had plenty of young people there. The rent was fair, and they said I could bring my dog.
In your 20s, so you were there about 5 years ago then.
Yeah, that's nice. You're my new friend. So it was, but then I wasn't a mother yet. There were rocket attacks already, but they were sort of something that you could, that's mistake number one, that you could sort of live with, because nobody needs to live with rocket attacks. But it has deteriorated throughout the years. I was still not a mother, which is a huge game changer. Okay, so I've lived there for a few years, and we've been through escalation that you won't believe. If it started from mortar bombs It came to booby-trapped balloons and burning kites and very heavy artillery and laser-guided anti-tank missile and terror attack tunnels and all kinds of different threats.
I don't mean to date you, but when you say you moved, was this before? I know Hamas took over. They've long held military or terroristic control of the Gaza Strip, but they took over political control. I believe it was 2006. Was this prior to that you originally moved there?
Yes, I moved there in 2002. It started in 2001, the rocket attacks. In 2006, Hamas won the majority of seats in their parliament, and then 2007 they took the Gaza Strip by force. Okay, they drove the PLO out and they took the Gaza Strip by force. That was after the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, and those years are very the great change of escalation started then. Okay, in those years.
Because sadly, and I've been saying it for a long time, tell me if I'm right or wrong, that the level of humanitarian aid that, many might be giving some of this humanitarian aid, quote unquote, to the Palestinian people in good faith. But sadly, since 2006 and 2007, that aid has largely gone to building an evil infrastructure, in my opinion, that is designed to protect Hamas against retaliation and to hide Hamas underneath the citizenry as they prepare for things like October 7th.
I absolutely agree. We have witnessed things being so close. Firstly, when you're so close, you know the people, you know some of the people. People don't understand this, but there were Palestinians that were working on our kibbutz. We had a friendship relationship with some of them. I had Gazans at my wedding and at my dinner table, and they were very critical of Hamas too, okay, some of them. And so the deterioration that happened was something that you couldn't even, it was nothing that you could foresee coming. And the people of my community are very left-wing. Okay, we have over 90% center-left voters. So when you talk about humanitarian aid, we used to give a lot of humanitarian aid too to the Palestinians, okay? And there are some great Palestinian people, very good ones. And I agree that it is very important to send humanitarian aid. But when you see that the ruler of this place steals from its people, okay, I'll give you one example. When Israel withdrew, they left greenhouses abundant with fruit and vegetables, and the people of Gaza were told to smash them down, okay? So if you have a starving population and you have so much food, what are you doing? You're taking the money instead of building, hanneries and crops and all the things you need. You go and put billions into terror attack tunnels, and that is mind-blowing.
So on October 7th, walk us through your experience. And I hate to ask you to do this because it has to be, just a horrific day, considering how we know how many people, how many Israelis died that day. But just walk us through your experience.
It was a very difficult day. 6:30 a.m. We woke up, my husband and I, from alarms and from explosions, very loud explosions. And this is something that is not very rare, in Israel. So what we did was to run to our safe room. In Nahal Oz, due to the proximity, every house has a bomb shelter attached to it. One of the bedrooms is a bomb shelter with iron shutters and an iron door and everything. And most families keep the children there. That's the bedroom of the children. So my children were there, and my husband and I ran to their room with the dogs, obviously, and closed the door behind us. We were sure, like the same story, 10 minutes and it's over. But there was something very different that day. Because one thing was that, when Hamas wants to fool around or just hassle you, they will launch rockets to the outskirts of the kibbutz, like the crop fields and things like that. But when they mean business, they will launch them to the neighborhoods where people live. And that day it was very close, and it was just massive. It was unstoppable. And it took us about half an hour, I believe, to understand that this was a completely different thing going on. Yeah.
So how long were you in the shelter with your husband, your kids, your dogs?
20 hours. We were evacuated around 2 a.m. But we couldn't stay all day long in the shelter because my son is handicapped. And, when people needed to relieve themselves, they found creative ways, but he must have his accessible toilet.
Sure.
So we had a few times that we had to go out of the safe room, which was very, very frightening.
During this time, could you hear, boots on the ground? Could you hear people in the streets? Were you aware that this was more of an invasionary force rather than just rockets coming over?
Well, it happened in stages, okay, the understanding, because I live right at the center of the kibbutz. The attack started from the outskirts. They came in from the back gate and from the front gate. So they came to my neighborhood, but it took them longer. What we could hear was very serious battles, noises, They were they came to the kibbutz with RPG rockets and things that are very easily, you can hear. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, a month after October 7th, for a month, all I could hear in my head were gunshots, like a battlefield sounds. One day I was jumping out of my seat to look around and see a woman walking with a stroller on pebbles, and I heard gunshots. So it was all day long for 20 hours. And we knew what was going on because people from the neighborhoods that are closer to the gates and were attacked first wrote messages on our group, on our WhatsApp group, so we knew what was going on.
Was there any point, and by the way, our guest is Oshrite Sabag. She is an Israeli citizen with us in the States to tell her story and to draw some further awareness to the continued plight of the Israeli people, particularly the hostages. Was there a point, and this is a difficult question to ask, was there a point that you worried that you wouldn't survive? Was that a concern for you?
Sure. Yes. There were points in the day, for example, around noon, Hamas had GoPro cameras and they live streamed the whole thing. And they did it in the most vicious way, which was to live stream. Let's say they attacked a certain family. So they live streamed what they were doing to them on the family's own social media. So their friends and families could see it while it was happening. So when we turned our social media on, and we saw neighbors that were 4 or 5 houses away from me, that were held by terrorists, and we saw people injured, and we heard that people were murdered. We heard a 12-year-old girl asking, but why did you kill her? She was just a child. And we didn't know if she was referring to her 15-year-old or an 18-year-old sister. Apparently her 18-year-old was murdered by them. So you could see it as it happened, and it was very close to us. So of course that we were, I cannot describe the terror really. I cannot. It was awful. I
hesitate to ask, but I think it's important that I think most of our listening audience understands. I think it's important that we don't shy away from it. Because I think it's important to understand the brutal nature of that day and how it truly was. I know it's been said in the past, but it was Israel's 9/11 in the sense of the number of people that were killed that day. Hold your thought. We'll be back in just a moment. We've got a quick timeout to take. Oshrite Sabag is our guest in studio with us, Israeli citizen who experienced the horrific day of October 7th, 2023. We're almost at a year anniversary. We'll be back in just a moment. I have a very special guest in studio with us, and thanks to Erin Gulbranson for bringing this to the Middle Tennessee community. Her name is Oshrite Sabag. She is an Israeli citizen. She was less than half a mile away from Gaza at the moment of the attacks as they began on October 7th. And I want to finish up with the day. I don't want to belabor it because I don't think we need to belabor it. We know the horrific nature of what happened that day. When did you just walk us through how you discovered the totality of the event that happened? I imagine that there was a lot of chaos. I can't imagine because I would never presume to understand what you went through. But walk us through getting out of the shelter and understanding what had happened and the days that followed.
Well, it is very important to understand that each and every one of us we were locked in our safe rooms, so we didn't know exactly what was going on in the outside world. We had text messages. I'm the leader of education in my kibbutz, so there were a few teenagers that felt comfortable calling me. Some because their parents didn't function very well. There was a lot of horror at the kibbutz that day. There's one story I do want to tell. There was a family that lived right by the front gate, and their 13-year-old son went jogging in the morning. So the mother called the head of our security, who was the sweetest guy, and she said to him, "Listen, you must go get my boy. Go get the boy." And he said, "Don't worry, I'm going." He went, he looked for him, he found him, and he didn't have enough time to bring him back to his family's house. So he put the boy in his own house with his wife and children. As he closed the door behind him to go back to Bethel, he was on the spot, brutally murdered in a way that we couldn't recognize we couldn't identify his body for days. We were sure he was kidnapped. We were hoping, that he was still alive. And the family of that boy was murdered. 2 parents, 2 teenage daughters, were brutally murdered. So those 2 people, the mother and the head of security, managed to save that boy just minutes before, they, and it was done in the most vicious way. I mean, they killed an entire family. They went outside, they found a family photo, like on the refrigerator or something, marked an X, and then sat down to eat the family's Shabbat meal instead of them. It was horrific. We figured out that it was different when we were turning the television on, seeing the city of Sderot roaming with terrorists, and they tried to take over the police station. They almost succeeded in it, and we saw it, and we said, and the city of Sderot is like 15 minutes drive from the border. So we said, if this is going on over there, oh my God, what is happening in my community? So we had an idea that this is different, and this was a whole different scale. And then throughout the day, there was a lot of tension. The IDF arrived to my house around 2 p.m. And then we thought that everything was, fine and dandy, and the IDF is here, we're protected. But we were very wrong, because the kibbutz was, in my kibbutz, they were over 120 terrorists at once. And we had at the beginning, till the IDF arrived, 11 combat soldiers that were there by chance, Israeli soldiers, and about 3 of kibbutz members that had weapons with them, because it's very not common to have a weapon in Israel.
Several people on the text line here wanted it. When you say kibbutz, what does that mean?
What's a kibbutz?
Yeah, what is a kibbutz?
A kibbutz, I tend to forget that nobody knows
No, it's
that.
all good. It's all good.
A kibbutz is a small agricultural community. Okay, Israel has a few of those.
Like a neighborhood?
It's not a neighborhood. It's like a small community that functions. It's very social. Like there's like support system between us. It's like big families. We are less than 500 people on my kibbutz. Okay, it's like a big family. It's like a community. It's a community that lives together. This is agricultural community. So we have our dairy farm, and we have our henneries, and we have crop fields, So
what did if you could, well, I'll tell you what, I'm looking at the clock here. We've got bottom of the hour news to go to, and then we'll be back and continue the discussion. If you have any questions for our very special guest, please ask them on the membersnutrition.com super text line. Conversation ongoing with Oshrite Sabag, who is an Israeli citizen who was there on the day, October 7th, where, our modern world certainly changed in so many dramatic ways, and it's an incredible conversation. Our conversation that's happening on air is continuing off air, and I feel like, we've got to stop talking off air so we can share this with everyone. Because I asked you a question, and I want to visit that question again, because your answer was so powerful. Because the big debate, outside of the crazies, and we have some crazy people on college campuses that I don't think they know what they're saying when they talk about their support of Hamas or their support of God, and then they talk about genocide and all these types of things. I feel like that's born of ignorance and sadly misplaced anger
and bad journalism also.
And no question. But for many people, they wonder when we talk about the Palestinians, how many of those Palestinians are supportive of Hamas versus how many of them are being subjugated by Hamas and live in fear of Hamas? You told me a story, and I want you to revisit it, that in your area of Israel, that your community befriended Palestinians.
Oh, yeah. We live very close to the border. So there are relationships because life is stronger than everything. You know, I had cousins at my wedding. I had them at my dinner table. We had friends. We had good friends from Gaza. And I'm not the only one. There were plenty of people in my society, my community. And you have to understand that this part of Israel that they attacked is the most left-wing in the country, most humanitarian, thinking vast majority of the people believe in, reaching a solution with the Palestinians, having negotiations with them. Everyone believes that we can
the most open to
the
relationships.
Most open to. I will give you this fact: above 90% center-left voters on my community, just my community. And but this was very troubling because when we saw the pictures, and it's a bit graphic, I'm sorry, but there were plenty of women that were raped in the most brutal way. And I'm talking about mutilation while raping, and I'm talking about women that their breasts were cut out, things that really, it's very hard for me to even repeat. But when we saw photos, when we saw videos of those naked Israeli girls' bodies that were brought into Gaza, you saw a huge crowd of civilians that are spitting on the bodies and, beating up the bodies, and they had glee in their eyes. And for us, that was very confusing, and that was very,
And these were people in the same communities that you had tried to befriend.
Yeah, some of them, not many people can cross the border, but we had plenty of people that were working at our, on our communities, and we had people, that we had, strong relationships with. So this was very, very confusing. There were also people from Gaza that called their friends in Israel and wanted them to tell them where the army was or things like that. So it will be easier for Hamas to attack us. So that was something that was very, very troubling. People that were working on the kibbutz, cousins that came to work, some of them, a very large part of them, they mapped the different kibbutzim. They had maps. They knew exactly where head of security lives.
So they're working with you.
Working with us.
And simultaneously, they're feeding information to the terrorists.
Exactly. I remember one day of looking outside my window, and I saw a Palestinian worker looking around to see that nobody's watching him. Now, he couldn't spot me. And he took out his cell phone and he started taking pictures of backyards of my neighbors. And so those kind of things.
Oshrite, does that harden your heart?
Well, look, I will tell you this. I've been, all my life, I believed in being humanitarian. If you'd known me over a week, you'd know that there's not one single racist bone in my body. And I'm not stupid enough to believe that 2 million people were all created the same and they all want to kill me. But there is a huge problem there, and it is apparently a very large percentage of the population in Gaza. What you can think about is that if you think about it, Hamas has been in power for the last 17 or 18 years in Gaza. And, the studying books have changed there, they preach to hatred, and you can find mothers there that their dream is for their child to become a shaheed, like a suicide bomber or something like that. And those are values that I cannot even comprehend. I cannot, understand it.
Are you supportive and are members of your kibbutz supportive of Benjamin Netanyahu and the way that he has reacted? I mean, in our country, we understand. I mean, I hear, you hear a lot of different thoughts on this, and that we understand that there has to be a response, and some say that the response has gone too far. Some suggest that there are too many civilian deaths. Our American media, I think sadly, they are completely biased in their reporting about what happened to you, what happened to Israel, and how Israel feels like it has to respond in order to continue to exist. What are your thoughts on the response of your prime minister?
I'll tell you this. This is a quite complicated answer to give. Firstly, I don't always agree with my government, okay? And thank God I live in a society that allows me to say that and stay alive. But I had that thought over the years, okay? When you have a democratic country, it doesn't matter who is in power at the moment, which party is in power. But when you have a democratic country trying to negotiate with people that it says in their charter, that they all their goal is to annihilate the state of Israel. So I don't think that it's ever, the blame of the democratic country for not reaching an agreement. About this particular fight right now, I can tell you that I pain for every innocent lives that were taken. But you have to understand that we know that throughout the years, they have been bombing us from schools, from hospitals, from all kind of places. When we had people protesting, by the way, by the border, okay, every Friday we had protests by the border of Gazans. Now, I have all the things in the world that I want to protest about. I can go there and protest against the Gazans, okay? I would never dream of bringing my baby child over there, Mm-hmm. That's something that you wouldn't even think about. So there are plenty of casualties that I hope that we could have avoided. But you have to understand that they are actually, I know that many people find it hard to understand because we live in a totally different society, in a totally different culture probably, but they do use their children as human shields. Mm-hmm. It does happen. And they do use civilians as human shields. Now, when you are saying that there are still Israeli toddlers that are being held hostage. So if a family decides to hide Israeli hostages in their house, I'm terribly sorry, but it's not going to stop us from, looking for our lost children, with all due respect. And
how many hostages do you think? Do we know how many are still?
There are still 101 hostages. I don't know what their situation is. I would love to be very positive and think that they are all well, but that would be, very naive. I hope that we are waiting for them. We're praying for them. It's very important for us, to have them back, of course, like every life-loving society. I have to tell you this, when you speak about the response. As I told you before, I'm a Middle Eastern Jew. And if you look at the entire Middle East, people are obsessed with the tiny strip of Israel, but there's a whole bigger story here. Yes. If you look at if you broaden your perspective and you look at the entire Middle East, you will see how many Jews actually fled out of countries in the Middle East. Right now, the only place where I can live is Israel. And even when being limited to the tiny Israel, and Israel is tiny, you can drive through it within like 6 hours, all right? I can't have it. I can't have a haven. I've been originated in the Middle East, like the vast majority of Israelis, okay? That's going to be a shock to some of the listeners, but we were not parachuted from Europe. We were there, my family, for generations on generations, for example. And when I live in my house in Nachal Oz, I need this threat to be lifted off my shoulders. The things that we have seen in the last 20 years, I'll give you just 2 examples, okay? One, 2011, a laser-guided anti-tank missile that was launched on our yellow school bus, and a teenager was murdered, okay? Those are things that no society around the world would live with, Or 2008, when they massively bombarded Nachal Oz out of the blue, it started. And I had a group of children on the way that was coming on a bus. I couldn't get hold of the bus driver because he was driving. So I had to run all the way to the station to accept the children while there was like all hell broke loose, you know, there were like bombs all around me. And I remember only ducking once underneath the dining room and praying a lot. And that just highlights of very tense everyday life, you know, that you need to think about. I mean, your children live in a bomb shelter. Think about it. This threat, and I'm sorry for everyone, I am very humanitarian and I'm very left-wing. This threat has to be lifted, has got to be lifted off my shoulders. I have every right, and nobody's doing me a favor in letting me live in the Middle East. I have every right to be there, and I have every right to have my, you know, haven, to live there peacefully and quietly. And people don't understand it, but if you look at the Middle East, all minorities of the Middle East go through this. If it's the Kurds or the Copts, or look at the Christian minorities in the Middle East, we are all being persecuted and we are all being attacked, constantly attacked. 2014, the Jews and the Yazidis were attacked by extreme, Muslim groups. We had an army, thank God. We lost 100 people. We could protect ourselves. The Yazidis went through a genocide, a real genocide, you know. They went through a genocide. Their daughters and sons were sold to be sex slaves. So, I mean, people just don't get the real picture of the entire Middle East, North Africa.
I'm saddened that we are approaching our time limit. I only have about a minute or so left, but I have two final questions. One, do you follow American politics, and does it concern you how America has responded in the past year and what the future might bring?
The reason I'm here to speak is that I'm very concerned about Western civilization societies. And I speak about the proper ones, you know, not the one that you go and you vote and that's it, we're a democracy, the proper ones. I mean, if there's something that unites us all, is that our forefathers went through the 7 gates of hell to get us the freedom that youth today are taking for granted. You see people walking in your campuses, walking with signs saying globalized intifada. I've lived through 2 intifadas in the past, in Israeli past, and October 7th was also a kind of intifada. Intifada is a violent uprising, is when you take down the army and the police. So when you get to the civilians, there will be no one left to help you. And I think that you cannot ask for something more stupid. You know, there's nothing more stupid than asking for this in your society. And I think that when people go without those signs saying globalized intifada, you should believe them. And I think that I'm very worried about our societies. I don't want to go back to a place where, you know, we don't have the ability to speak so freely about what we think.
And Belle, I know I'm running late, but I got to get 2 more minutes in here. So I actually have 2 more final thoughts. One, the listeners, thousands of listeners right now, what can they do to help?
Well, firstly, there's Moral Hearts Alliance that really works now to get Jews and Christians together, since we share mutual values, and it is very important for us to stick together now. You mentioned the geopolitical, and I mentioned, you know, the Western civilization, and I think that it is very important. So Moral Hearts Alliance, you can go to their website and you can donate there for them to continue working on those amazing relationships. They are doing amazing work. That is very important. And I urge the listeners to spread the stories. Please spread our stories. I think that it is so important to combat the amount of ignorance that is running in the world today. Okay. There was a woman that told me that Jesus was the forefather of the Palestinians. I mean, the ignorance today is unbelievable. You know, it's funny, but it's not.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and this is fine because you don't know this about me, Oshrite, but I'm a big dog lover, and you mentioned something right at the beginning, and I just want, you said that, what's your dog's name? The one that you were talking about? Brat?
Yeah.
And that when the bombs came down, he covered up your son?
Yeah. My son is handicapped. He cannot walk without his walker. And when the bombardments were massive, they were massive all throughout the day, but there were some points that they were like extra massive. So he jumped on my boy that was on his bed, and he just covered his entire body with his body, and that's dogs for you.
Good boy.
Nothing like dogs.
I know.
Aren't they much better than people?
This has been, it's an absolute pleasure to spend an hour with you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Aaron, thank you for bringing this wonderful guest to our table.
It's a privilege.
Aaron, thank you. And I want to say thank you to Faith and Freedom and what you're doing, and that you are cooperating with us. This is so important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oshrite Sabag has been with us for the hour, and it's been incredible. We'll podcast it if you missed any moment of it.